welcome everybody to At Lunch. This is our final At Lunch until for the summer, and we're going to take a couple of months off and then see everybody again in September, I hope. Today we have a wonderful guest, Anita Hollander. She's an actress, singer, composer, lyricist, director, producer, and teacher. And she's performed all over the place, on and off Broadway, at the Kennedy Center, Carnegie Hall, Shakespeare in the Park, Europe, Asia, Russia. She's had a great career. And Anita would be remarkable just for that. But imagine doing everything I just said, performing on one leg for decades. Anita lost one of hers to cancer in her 20s, just when she was starting out. And since then, through her work on stage and off stage, she has enlightened the world about disability. Behind the scenes, in prominent positions at the Screen Actors Guild and Actors Equity, she has promoted greater visibility and employment for people with disabilities. It is a pleasure and honor to welcome Anita Hollander to At Lunch.
Hi, Julie.
It's wonderful to see you. So Anita, I know you were recently the commencement speaker at your high school in Cleveland. We're both from Ohio. Could you tell us what that meant to you? And then tell us about your trip back to New York. For me, that trip, the high and the low of it, represents a lot about your life. Could you tell us about it?
Oh, let's see. I was very honored to be invited to my alma mater, the place where I grew up from kindergarten right through senior year. I never thought that I would be asked to do the commencement speech. My daughter was the valedictorian of Professional Performing Arts School here in New York City. So we thought, well, as far as I was concerned, that was it for our family. That was great. And it was like, we have a valedictorian. My sisters thought it was great. My mother, everybody. Last thing I ever expected was that I would be that person up there. And I was even introduced by a student at the graduation who said that he thought he would never be standing on that stage because he had been in a special program for four years of high school for people with disabilities. He had an anxiety disorder, and after the first day of him on campus, he realized he had a terrible anxiety attack, and they have a special program, which is in a smaller building. So it's a little less difficult for students who have that disorder. And so he thought, well, after 4 years of being in the separate building, I never thought I'd be standing up in front of my class, which was his class because he graduated with them, giving the speech. And he mentioned that he never thought when he introduced himself to me that I would be so thrilled that he had an anxiety disorder, because it was like, I'm an advocate for people with disabilities. I think you're the perfect person to introduce me. And he did a great job. And that says a lot about me, because my first reaction when somebody tells me they have a disability is, wow, that's great. I'm feeling it's wonderful. We are the largest minority in the country. So I love meeting people who have a disability, and my family knows that if somebody suddenly we notice somebody has a disability, they know I'm just going to go be so excited and make friends with them right away and say, oh, I want to tell you about this and this and this. So that's me. It ended up being an absolutely great experience. And I was very determined that this class, who's like much younger than me, would they get anything from the speech? Would I say anything that would actually help them? Or would they still be sitting there looking at their watches waiting, like, I just want to get my diploma? And they, so I worked very hard to try to give them something. And what I did not expect was that the minute I said like the first couple of things, they were like cheering. After all the boring speeches, I mean, there were wonderful people making speeches before me, but there, it was very quiet, very sedate. And the minute I started in, they were like, it was really great because I haven't been in high school in a many, many, many years, many decades. So it made me very happy and moved that we could relate to each other and work together. I mean, it's not that I don't teach. I work with kids all the time, but I didn't know these kids in particular. And I was very happy that my Shaker community really did get something out of the speech.
That's great. And could you tell us about the trip home?
I'm trying to remember what
didn't you have I thought you had one of your spectacular.
Oh, yes, thank you, Julie, for reminding me. My second, I've written 2 solo musicals for those of you who don't know, and the second one is called Spectacular Falls, because I don't just fall. I fall a lot. I don't just, I have one leg, but I don't just fall. It's always something spectacular, like going through turnstiles and like doing a backflip, or, it can't be just, just drop on the floor. No. My foot slipped out from under me. I still don't know. I was standing still, but my foot slipped out from under me, and so I landed on the floor and thought, oh no, I have to do this and this and this and this. But I managed to get myself home and back to New York from Cleveland, and all is well. All is well. I'm really fine, and I'm just very grateful whenever I get back up and everything is where it should be, and I can still just get up and walk away.
That's amazing, and that is very much who you are, Anita. I was wondering, when did you first think you wanted to be a professional performer? Were you one of those kids who was 4 and said, I want to be on stage? When was it? And then how did you go about making that happen from Cleveland, Ohio to New York City?
Great question, Julie. And I have a visual aid. It was before I was born. 6 years before I was born, my grandmother, Celeste, was born. She died 6 years before I was born. My mother's mother passed away. She was in vaudeville. Take a look. This is her headshot. She was in vaudeville. She danced in a leopard skin on the stage, in the Roberts circuit. You've heard of maybe the Schubert circuit or whatever, but this was the Roberts touring circuit. This is me at age 40, and this is her. And I don't know if you'll notice, but we almost look like the exact same person in different eras. You'll see behind it is the story of her. She was brought from the Ukraine, from Odessa, in 1904, and on a boat to Ellis Island. And when they put her up on the rail, she saw the Statue of Liberty. And Julie will know that that is actually a lyric from a song I wrote for the children's choir at the Village Temple with the kids of the Village Temple about children immigrating and refugees coming to America, immigrants. And that was who she was. She was tiny. She was 3 years old. It was 1904. She came to America and became a performer in the vaudeville circuit. And she had quite a personality from what I was told. And I was born in 1955, 6 years after she died. My mom was fairly young when she died. And I immediately was determined to do something, so much so that I didn't shut up my whole first year of life. I was a screamer all night long. The only time my parents thought there was something wrong with me was when I didn't make any noise. And that night I had jumped out of my crib. And my mother said that I had piled up stuffed animals in the crib, which is why they don't put stuffed animals in cribs anymore. Climbed up at the age of 1, jumped out of the crib, landed on my head, and got a concussion. I was so determined. It was like, I think I came back as Celeste and thought, wait, I didn't mean come back as a baby. I have people to see, I have things to do. Jumped right out of the crib. Fortunately, I did not die. And I literally, my dad was a Broadway enthusiast. So we were getting Broadway albums. Every time a new musical came out, we were living in Cleveland. My dad would bring home the album. So I was dancing in the living room, making up my own stories to every album, like My Fair Lady or Camelot or Sound of Music or West Side Story or whatever. I was making them up in the living room on my way before I got to kindergarten. But even before I got to kindergarten, I was 4 years old, and my family was at a Hungarian Benevolent Society event. A magician was setting up, my dad's side was Hungarian. They were setting up a magic show, and the magician said, would anybody like to come up and do something, perform a little while we're setting up? And my mom didn't know that I had left her side the minute somebody asked that question. And I was, before she knew it, I was on the stage, 4 years old, singing not Mary Had a Little Lamb, but I'll Know When My Love Comes Along from Guys and Dolls, with the whole dialogue, like chemistry, yes, chemistry. I don't know if I understood what I was saying, but I sang the whole song, and people were like, I don't know what she's doing, because it wasn't great diction. It was just like, whatever. And so that was my first stage performance. Fortunately, my mother caught on that this is something I needed to do, and my dad too. And she took me to an audition at 8 years old, and I got the understudy for Gretel in The Sound of Music at a professional theater in Cleveland, Music Carnival, an outdoor theater in the round under a tent with Broadway performers. So I was performing with Broadway performers, directors. The musical director, the conductor was Wally Harper, who ended up being Barbara Cook's musical director in New York. I was 8 years old and was exposed immediately to the Broadway world that I, as far as I'm concerned, already knew about because of my grandmother, because I fit right in. And the little girl playing Gretel was kind enough to get German measles for 3 days, and I went on. And she even said, I'm so glad I got sick so you could do it. And then from there on, my family knew that that's what I had to do and wanted to do. And fortunately, they helped nurture me. And whenever there was something, the Cleveland Playhouse I performed at, and there was a Heights Youth Theater, Chagrin Valley Little Theater, and the JCC in Cleveland had the Halley Theater, and I did one of the most serious acting jobs there, House of Bernardo Alba, at 17 years old, and I got an acting award, and it was fantastic. And in my school, people knew that that was what I was going to do. So I was always getting voted like most likely to succeed, and we loved to joke like, what? But they knew that I knew what I wanted to do. I thought everybody knew what they wanted to do, and they showed me. They said, no, you're really the only one who knows what she wants to do. So, and I would be going to school all day long, and then doing Martha Jefferson in 1776 at night with all adults and people much older than me. And I was playing Martha Jefferson. It was very fortuitous and very clear that that's what I wanted to do. And so my serious goal for after high school was to go to Carnegie Mellon University. And I got in and got to go, and it was great. And in my junior year, I began to have a challenge that was going to make it a little harder for me to continue my career. But as far as I was concerned, my career started at 8 years old professionally, so I wasn't going to stop. But I don't know if you want me to go any further with that. But
this is amazing. And I do have to say, seeing that picture of your grandmother is eerie, because it does feel like reincarnation. And I do want to ask you in a couple minutes about your whole Jewish identity, because clearly it's big. But before we do that, yes, continue with the story, because what happened when you were at Carnegie Mellon?
So in junior year, something was wrong with my leg. My dad, who was the cantorial soloist at the Fairmount Temple in Beechwood, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio area, he suddenly died in my sophomore year, the beginning of my sophomore year. Just suddenly died of a heart attack on the tennis court, just like went for a ball and dropped dead, literally. We didn't see it coming. Nobody knew. 48 years old. He was the picture of health, and that was it. And I was in my sophomore year. And 6 months after he died suddenly, which is, as you know, I'm sure everybody listening knows that that's quite a shock. I have three sisters, the four of us who all sang together and performed together all through our childhood and everything. All of us were like, you know, and my mother, of course, my mother, who was like only about 40, 41 years old. I mean, it was crazy. But I went back to school, and 6 months after his death, I started to have pain in my leg and back, and I didn't know what it was, but it was pretty bad. And my mother and I went to doctors, one after another. We ended up going to 10 different doctors who were all telling me there, 9 of which told me there was nothing wrong. 9 months later, in my junior year, I finally had to leave school. We left school for the holidays, and I was supposed to be doing Kiss Me Kate at Carnegie Mellon when we came back, but instead I had to be in the hospital because finally the 10th doctor knew something was blocking the nerve in my left leg, the motor nerve, which was why I was losing my ability to use my foot, like dance classes, like my foot was just hanging there. I had what was called foot drop because the sciatic nerve wasn't working anymore. Something was blocking it. And that neurologist in Cleveland sent me to New York. And of course I wanted to go to New York, not quite that way, but I ended up at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York, the Neurological Institute, where they discovered that there was a tumor there. And at first, everybody was thinking, well, it's just, you know, we'll just take it out. It's obviously benign. It wasn't benign. It was high-grade malignant cancer. And thank God they found it, because the idea of cancer spreading through my nervous system was just a horrible thought. I was 21 years old. And the doctor, the neurosurgeon, did not want to amputate my leg because he thought that that would ruin my life, and instead resected. In other words, made a big seam in my leg, opened it up, took out the sciatic nerve, and sewed me back up. So I had like a stocking seam down the back of my left leg, but I did not have a motor nerve. So they put a plastic brace from my knee down through my foot, looked like a shoehorn, went under my foot. The brace was invisible underneath stockings, but I could not wear heels, but I could wear flat shoes and I could dance. And I was paralyzed from the knee down, but it didn't really matter because I already knew how to dance. I already knew how to do the things that I needed to do on stage. And as soon as they taught me how to walk without being able to feel my foot, then I was walking and I was dancing and I was performing and doing mime and doing all these things. And the point was, I tell everybody there's a gift in everything that happens to me. And the gift in this case was Carnegie Mellon, because I had major surgery. I then was started on chemo and would eventually have radiation in the fall of my senior year. So going through all this, I knew I had to get back to school. So it was like, teach me how to walk again, because I want to go back to school. So I went back to school 6 weeks after the surgery, having started chemo, got the last, was with my class till the end of the year, which was sometime in April, but stayed on at Carnegie Mellon through the summer to teach, to assist and teach the high school pre-college program, because I needed, the trauma had taken my voice away. It wasn't just the motor nerve that went away. I couldn't sing. I couldn't get the breath support. It was just such a trauma. And also, they had stuck something down my throat and stuff like that. Anyway, so I spent the summer assisting the voice teachers at Carnegie Mellon, who worked with me every day and got my voice back. And so by the fall of my senior year, still on chemo, no hair and all that stuff, I headed into radiation as well as my senior year. So I would start the day at 6 a.m. with radiation, then go to classes all day long, and then rehearsals or performances of shows in the evening on campus. That was our job. That was what we did. But nobody but me started their day at 6 a.m. in the radiology ward of the University of Pittsburgh Hospital, Pittsburgh Presbyterian. Yeah. In the basement, watching children, little children have radiation, and I didn't know if they would be alive the next day. I mean, it was quite a shocking thing to live your life from a radiation in the morning to your classmates in a theater program, in a drama, a serious drama training program, and then rehearsals or performance this night. So a lot of some in my show, Still Standing, I have a thing about the dressing room because they're talking about trivial stuff and you're just wondering if your shoe will stay on your foot because sometimes it's slid off from the brace and you'd end up on stage with no shoe on. I mean, that was what I was thinking. And they were like, you know, the toilet isn't flushing and, you know, and do you have any eyebrow pencil and stuff like that? And I was like, just let my wig stay on, because I would always have whatever character I was playing, and most of the time it was character roles, some this wig or that wig, because I wasn't going to be doing the show bald. So that was my senior year, and I caught up with my class, and I got my stage fighting certification with a brace on my leg. And the wonderful fight choreographer, B.H. Barry, who is, if you look on any movie thing or any theatrical stuff, the fight director's usual B.H. Barry, or someone who worked with him or studied with him. And he was our teacher, and they brought over the judge to decide if we would get our certification or not. And Barry didn't tell them that I had a brace on my leg, and I passed, and he brought out champagne, because it was quite a miracle that without feeling anything under my knee, I could do sword fighting, quarter staffs, daggers. I was with my wonderful partner. Most of my classmates were too afraid to hurt me, but Roscoe Gilliam, who went directly on into chorus line on Broadway after we graduated, I think in his senior year, but he was brave enough to say, I'll work with you. But he told me he was terrified the whole time of hurting me, but we passed the test. And so I got done with Carnegie Mellon, and I graduated with my class immediately. The first role I got right out of college that summer was Laura in Glass Menagerie, who talks about having a brace on her leg. Tennessee Williams, it was like perfect role for me. And then that same summer, I did 2 other shows, one of which was Stop the World, I Want to Get Off With, which I played a woman. I played 4 different female characters. The lead role plays 4 different, with different accents and different characteristics and stuff, and does mime, and like a circus. And I had to do that with the brace on my leg, which, because of my training, I could do that. And then went straight to London, to the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, LAMDA, for 1 year of international training. And the reason I was one of only 4 women who got into this program. 11 men got in, 4 women from all over the world. But my brace actually helped me, because at my audition, I was so afraid they'd see the brace. I put on black tights, I came, I sang, I did a model. And they asked, because they could see something, because they were at eye level with my brace. I was up on a stage. I think they asked about it, was there something there? And I said, yes, I have a brace on my leg. I had cancer last year. No more cancer, just a brace on my leg. And they said, well, that's wonderful, because one of our most famous students, Anna Calder-Marshall, who did a lot of work on BBC, she had what they called a withered leg, meaning she had a brace on her leg. So it actually helped me. And that's why I tell people there's always a gift in everything that happens to you. I mean, I know I had to get in on the talent. I had to be able to sing well. I had to be able to act well. But they had 1,000 women, vying for these 4 spots. And the delight that they showed in who I was beyond a performer just freaked me out. And I spent a year there, and then they cast me in a touring production of graduating students from LAMDA that went all over Europe, an original production about Elizabeth I. And so there were characters in it. All the women played Elizabeth at different stages of her life. And of course they had me playing her in the scene where she dances with the big Elizabeth I costume, big skirt, the big ruff and the big hair and everything. And I'm dancing under all of this with a brace on my leg, which just it's an amazing thing to me. I mean, I look back, even then I knew it was just rather extraordinary. And I also got to play Anne Boleyn in that production. And Anne Boleyn, I found out, wrote songs. She wrote songs. And I sang one of the original songs by Anne Boleyn. I didn't know that. When you go to see the musical Six on Broadway, they don't tell you that Anne Boleyn actually wrote songs. And the one she wrote about her death, about going to her death, is the song that I sang. So they took everything that was good and that I was able to do in that show. And as I told the students of Shaker, the graduates, that really told me I was ready for this profession. I was ready to go into my professional adult life, having started so early, but even with this roadblock, nothing was going to stop me from going on. Of course, yes.
Oh, so this is amazing, but it leads to a question that I really want to make sure we have time to talk about, which was, I mean, yes, you had the talent, yes, you had the drive, and you had the lucky breaks that you went to this place where they welcomed you. You then went on later in your life, and you can talk about that in a minute, where ultimately you lost your leg. So it became even harder, the whole leg gone. And then you began working as the chair of the Screen Actors Guild Disability Rights Program and for Actors Equity. And one thing that I think would be really interesting to hear from the vantage point of that, how different is it for young performers starting out now who have disabilities than it was for you? I thought, I mean, you're making it sound like, oh, all these opportunities came back and I fell into it. I don't think it was quite that easy, at least not for most people. And I was wondering if you could say how the work you've done on behalf of people with disabilities has helped change things for people who want to follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Julie. Well worded, the whole question, because 5 years after the first operation, the tumor came back in the little bit of nerve that was left, and that was when I had to have an amputation. And I was in rehearsal living in Boston at the time, and I was in rehearsal for Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris, a musical, which I was not only in, but I was directing. And when I was diagnosed with the second tumor and told that the amputation would have to happen, I gathered the cast around my bed and in the hospital, and I said, I've written out what you're going to do for the next 2 weeks, but I've talked to the PTs and I will be back walking on one leg instead of two. I will be able to come back to rehearsals in 2 weeks, because I had talked to the PTs and they were like, anyways, it was a little shock to them, but it was like, when do I get up? When do I go downstairs? When do I do, So anyways, I did go back to rehearsals 2 weeks after the amputation. And 2 weeks after that, in those last 2 weeks, I staged the show on one leg. I told them they hadn't taken my brain, just my leg. So we finished staging the show and we opened a month after the amputation. I had a temporary artificial leg under a long dress. The temporary did not look like a leg. It was a bucket, a pole, a joint, a pole, and a foot, an artificial foot. It was not as beautiful and wonderful and workable as the permanent, but they can't make you a permanent till a certain amount of time out after an amputation. So I got back on stage with my cast. We did the show, got a lot of publicity because this was quite an odd thing that just happened. And it was lovely that we were able to get more publicity because I just lost my leg. But we did an eight weeks of the show. And then once again, it said to me, don't worry, you're going to be okay. Now, as to your question, I became an advocate for people with disabilities totally unintentionally after my first operation, because the minute I stepped on a stage with a brace on my leg, I was an automatic advocate for performers with disabilities. If any person with a disability were to say to me, I want to go into theater, they would be sent to me. It just happened. I toured for American Cancer Society as a celebrity against cancer, though nobody knew me, but you know, that's what they called me. And I went all over the country singing songs that would eventually be part of my show, Still Standing, but I didn't know that at the time, and talking about my story so that anyone there at these events would know there's hope, that whatever they're dreaming of doing, it's not impossible, and survival is not impossible. By the time I lost my leg, I really, that became very serious, that I was representing the disability community, the disabled performers community. Not that I knew there was one until I moved to New York in 1983 and found out there was a committee. And I was roped in by another actress with a disability and said, they need you. And I could tell at the first meeting I sat in, was they need me more than I need them, because I'm already working and I already had a career. And that was an advantage over somebody who wanted to start out in this business. But that doesn't mean I didn't go to one of my first auditions in New York. I think it was one, if not my first. I walked in a certain way and the director stopped me and wouldn't audition me because of the way I walked onto the stage. She stopped me. She said, this isn't for me. And I was like, no, here's my resume. No, this is what I do. Yeah, no, this isn't for you. And literally after waiting for hours to audition, because I wasn't yet equity, with other actors watching this, I was literally sent home without singing, without acting, without dance, even though I had a resume full of performances, and I was patronized and it was awful. But the universe got back at her, because the next day I found this out. The musical director, who wasn't at the audition, called this director and said, so how did the auditions go? And she said to him, no, a woman with one leg showed up. Well, I had an artificial leg. It wasn't like I had, well, anyways, she goes, oh, and he said, oh, Anita Hollander. Was that Anita Hollander? And she goes, well, I guess, yeah, that's who it was. He goes, wasn't she fabulous? And she said, well, I didn't have her audition. And he said, why didn't you have her audition? And she said, well, I didn't want her to embarrass herself. Fortunately, I knew that guy because he had played for me at the improvisation. I was the regular singer at the improvisation already when I went to that audition. I was singing, I was opening for Robin Williams. I was opening for Rodney Dangerfield. I was opening for Stephen Wright and Ray Romano. Brett Butler. I was opening for these people right uptown from this thing in the Village. And it was really kind of nice that they did that. Anyways, once I got involved, people sort of tugged on me, because the things that have happened now, like Ali Stroker getting the Tony, lovely person who's also on the committee, the cast of Spring Awakening when they did the Deaf Revival, these things were not happening when I was first in New York. And I did have casting people say to me, it's a shame, you're so talented. I mean, literally said that to me after I would do a monologue. They go, oh, it's too bad you're so good. Because their feeling was, I'm never going to get you hired. And, but fortunately, they were wrong. I continued to get work. And that was how I fought, by saying, look, I'm not angry, but this whole community of performers with disabilities who have all of this talent, they're pretty pissed. So it was the SAG. At first it was Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA, and Equity. Now it's SAG-AFTRA. Those two came together, which is the movies, the television, the recording artists, the broadcasters, all in one. And Equity is for stage actors. Anyways, I was involved with all of them in promoting performers with disabilities, events that brought the industry in to show them, look at this person, you know, and slowly but surely, it was like pushing a boulder up a mountain, and it still is, but we started to get somewhere. And we had a 3-year campaign, the committee, the National Committee of Performers with Disabilities for the union, from the unions, these SAG-AFTRA Equity. We had a 3-year campaign where we just pummeled the industry with us. We started a task force with the Hollywood producers. We had a task force here in New York with the Broadway producers and all of the regional producers and the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Producers Guild, the Casting Society of America. And we just pushed and pushed. It was from 2009 to 2012. And that was when the wheels started to grind a little more. But in the last few years, I kept a watchdog list, and I still do. I started that during the campaign, and we went from this many performers with disabilities to like now in television. During COVID, 50 performers with disabilities got jobs at television. I mean, that sounds like a small amount, but when you think about who actually gets a job in this industry, it's crazy. It's hardly, most of the unions with performers, all performers, only a small percentage are actually working, and we got working. And now on Broadway, in For Colored Girls, Alexandria Wales, a wonderful deaf actress, she was in that show. She's been in that show on Broadway. Michael Patrick Thornton, an actor in a wheelchair, is in Macbeth. It's
incredible.
And this summer of the in Central Park, Shakespeare in the Park has 5 actors with disabilities in Richard III. So, and this coming season on Broadway, you're going to see a lot more of us. And here at Playwrights Horizons, Jamie Brewer, an actress with Down syndrome, is right now in a show over there. So it's like, it has changed utterly. Theater, television, and Coda winning the Oscar for a movie where the 3 lead characters are deaf, played by deaf actors. Nobody's faking it here, it's authentic. So authenticity is what I've been fighting for, and what I think ultimately we are winning. We just have to keep going. We can't let the pressure down, but we are winning. And I think I had something to do with it, at least part of the.
Oh my God, you had so much to do with it. And you're so incredible. There's so much to talk about, but we're getting, and no, this is exactly what I wanted to hear from you, because honestly, we're living in these times that really test an optimistic outlet. And I think it's important for people to hear from somebody like you who had truly good reason to sort of feel pessimistic, to give up, and you never did. And not only that, you've helped so many other people find that strength or that role model, or that, just you can do it, which is really important, and you have the results. So thank you for telling us about that. We are the American Jewish Historical Society, so I do need to, and honestly, I will say to the audience, I first got to know Anita at the Village Temple, where she runs the most incredible children's choir in the world. And year in and year out, generations now really of children have gone through this program. So Anita, this has been a big part of your life, in addition to all the other many things you do. And you mentioned that your father was a cantor. What role does being Jewish play in your life?
Well, the wonderful thing is that when I came down to New York, but even before I came to New York, I was all over the world, and everywhere I went, because my dad did so much in his 48 years, not only with Judaism, but Jews in the world and interfaith. There was a professorship at John Carroll University at Cleveland after he died for interfaith studies with his name. A 48-year-old man had made such a difference to people in the world. Not just, he was a cantor, but he was also vice president of the National Temple Federation of Temple Brotherhoods. I mean, he was a presence all over the place and all over the world, apparently, because in London, when I was living in London, I went over to the West End Synagogue. He knew my dad, the rabbi knew my dad. And Copenhagen, when I worked there, I always found my way to a synagogue. Even in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, I was at the synagogue that had the Tree of Life. That was my synagogue when I was at Carnegie Mellon. I mean, it's interesting, the Jewish community all over the world is so connected in such an interesting way. But in New York, I met my I met the man I was going to marry, who became my husband in 1986, and I wasn't a member of a synagogue yet. And my Cleveland rabbi said, well, I will marry you and Paul, because Paul was not Jewish. I will marry you if you are a card-carrying member of a synagogue in New York. Well, I was teaching at NYU when I moved to New York. So I went to the nearest synagogue, which was the Village Temple. I had kept going by it on the number 4 bus, or some bus kept going by it. And I'm like, that's the cutest temple. I got to go in there. I met the rabbi. Loved the rabbi. It was at that time Dennis Math. I loved him, and we sat and talked. I told him I couldn't afford the dues, and he said, "Well, what can you afford?" I came up with a number. He said, "Done." And I said, "But I also can. I can do a lot of music. My dad is a cantor and was a cantor. I know I have so much music. I can contribute music." He goes, "Oh, better. Just contribute the music." And I started singing there. I did special little concerts. I brought my sisters from all over the country. They came in and sang, and we started doing musical things on Sundays with the cantor. And then I got married, and I had a daughter, and she was blessed under the sukkah at Village Temple. And when she was about 5, she saw the children's choir performing at the High Holy Days at Cooper Union, which is a big event, and it was huge. And we sat in the front row, and she was like, "I want to do that." And the director was Joanne. Oh my gosh. A beautiful woman named Joanne. And I'm going to kick myself for not knowing her last name. But Joanne Lowy. Joanne Lowy was conducting. And I asked her, could my daughter's name is Holland Hamilton. I said, could Holland, we went up after the service, could she join? And she goes, "Yeah, come on Yom Kippur. She can get up there and sing with us." A week later, she was in the choir, and then she started singing with that. And then Joanne got a great job in Pennsylvania and said, "How would you like to run the choir?" And I'm going, "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." And then before you know it, I won't tell you the rest of the story, but then before you know it, I was running the choir. And that was about 27 years ago, 20, something like that. And I could never get out of it once I started, because I didn't just teach the kids songs to sing for the holidays. Oh, we did all wonderful things like seders in the village for interfaith communities and stuff, because the Village Temple is so cool with its community. But after a while, it was like, we shouldn't just do these, we should write our own songs. And so with the kids, I would give them an idea like, thankful, what are you thankful for? And they would tell me, and that became a song. Julie wrote a book about Maimonides, Rambam's Ladder. And the kids and I looked at that and was like, we could do a book, we could do a song about tzedakah. And we wrote a song. They came up with the story and we wrote it. And then we dedicated that to Julie. And there's other songs about immigrants, songs about, our latest is the one about COVID, about our 2 years in COVID and what it was like, and the things those kids wrote. And all I did, I would step in, take all their words and write in, put it to music. And when we had just gone into lockdown and we just decided we would go on Zoom, the first thing we wrote was a song about leadership. And instead of singing a song called "What's Wrong with Our Leaders," I thought it would be better to say, "What makes a good leader?" And they came up with all these great ideas. And just recently, the last thing I'll say is that the choir sang recently for a service, and we decided we wanted to sing our immigration song called "Share the World." You can look it up on YouTube. You really should see this. "Share the World" says, the kids' idea was, in the middle of the song, we said "welcome" in 20 different languages based on their own family's ancestry. And one of them was Ukraine. And our wonderful Russian education director at Village Temple, I said, "Do you have a Ukrainian flag?" Well, he didn't do that. He gave each of the kids a Ukrainian flag. So when they said, "Laskavo Prosimo," they waved their Ukrainian flags. I know it's a small thing, but it was so big. It was such a huge moment that the kids not only were waving the flags, but they said "welcome" in Ukrainian. I love these kids.
Anita, it's so beautiful. And I love the way you integrate all parts of your life, but it always comes back to music and performing. And so I think that's a great way to end this session, which has been really inspiring. And I will tell everybody, Anita has a show next week. You will receive in your email, if you're on the Zoom, a link to the information about it. What's it called, Anita?
Well, they call it Disabled and Down Center because it is showcasing some of the Broadway and off-Broadway talent with disabilities to show the industry what roles we could be doing. And I will be doing Mrs. Lovett from Sweeney Todd. So it should be really fun.
Wonderful. So I highly recommend everybody go see it. You'll get the link in your email. And now we're going to exit. Anita is working on a song and she's going to play us just a little excerpt of it as we say goodbye. Thank you everybody for coming and look forward to seeing you next fall. Anita.
So I wrote this originally for somebody who had her bat mitzvah at the Village Temple. And then I also wrote, I rewrote it for the Shaker people who graduated, and now I'm singing it for you guys. It's just a little bit of it. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Doesn't mean you won't shed any tears. Courage helps us learn how strength is made resiliently by staring down our fears. Here we are, America in 2022. We've been through pandemic and those endless days on Zoom. Did I hear you complain? This world is just insane. No, this is your refrain. Be patient, kind, and joyful. Sing your fears away. We can be resilient. Rejoice in each new day.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's been a real pleasure to have you at lunch. Thank you, everybody.